So last season, we saw the Packers be pretty active in free agency, bringing in Josh Jacobs as well as Xavier McKinney. And now looking into this 2025 free agent class, the guy who most people see as the best free agent on the market, or who will be on the market, is T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. And there is a big question if the Bengals will really let him go. I think there's a good chance that the Bengals decide to keep him around because Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins are one of the best trios, quarterback and two wide receivers in the NFL. And so it wouldn't be shocking to see the Bengals decide to keep him. But if he were to go, could he really land in Green Bay? And there are so many factors here. Do the Packers want someone like T. Higgins? I think they would. But do they want to pay him around $28 million per year, which is what Over the Cap predicts his new contract will be? So there's so many different factors. And then, of course, the Packers will be competing with all the other teams in the NFL who could also want to bring him into their team. And so there's that factor of, does he really want to come to Green Bay, or would there be other places that he would rather go? So, as always with free agency, there's so many different questions. But looking from the Packers' perspective, looking at the Packers receiver room, I think that the Packers do have a lot of solid receivers. I think that there is some inconsistency problems when it comes to drops. If Dontavian Wicks hadn't had such a massive drop problem in 2024, I do think that with Christian Watson out, he could potentially fill in that second wide receiver spot outside next to Romeo Doubs. But there is some uncertainty just because of the drop issue he had. I still think he can be a solid receiver, but there are some questions there. And so the fact that Christian Watson is down and will likely miss a good part of the 2025 season, according to his dad, who had tweeted a few weeks to a month ago that he could be back around week 12 if the rehab went, I think, basically according to plan. And so with that being the case, I do think the Packers need to target some kind of receiver. And I had been thinking that, you'd want to try to bring in a receiver that was similar to Christian Watson, so a guy who could really be that deep threat for you, someone who has blazing speed that'll really test defenses deep. And so I still think that is a solid option. And when we look at T. Higgins, he is not the same type of receiver as Christian Watson. They are similar in size, but T. Higgins doesn't have the same kind of speed as Christian Watson, who is like a 4.36, 4.37, 40. I do think T. Higgins has some, good deep speed. I think he ran like a 4.59 40, but there are some plays where if you watch, he can win deep. And so he's not going to be the same type of deep threat as Christian Watson, but he can, be a guy that Jordan Love could target deep down the field. And when we look at T. Higgins, he had a lot of success in his time with the Bengals, and he was always the number 2 to Jamar Chase. And when we look at his yards per reception, this past year he had 12.5 yards per reception, which was 48th in the NFL among receivers with 50 targets. And so that's not a huge, yards per reception. But if we look at the previous year, 2023, he had 15.6 yards per reception, which would have been 12th in the NFL with receivers with at least 50 targets. So he has that ability to win deep, and I also think he's very solid after the catch. If we look at 2024 after the catch, it wasn't his best year. He was around 3 or so yards after the catch in 2024, but if we look back a year prior, he had a few more yards after the catch per reception. So I do think he has that ability, and I guess the real question is, would he make the Packers team better? No doubt. I think that he would bring a consistency to the Packers receiver room that is needed. If we look at his drop rate last year, he was tied for the 11th best drop percentage in the NFL. Only had 2 drops all season. The Packers' best receiver in that rank was Christian Watson at 47th. Dobbs was at 65th, and then I didn't look to see where Wicks and Jaden Reed were because I know they're way down there because they were up there when it came to drops in the NFL in 2024. And so when you look at it from that perspective, T. Higgins, I think, would bring a very consistent, he'd be a very consistent player in this Packers offense, a guy that Jordan Love could really trust, more of a veteran type presence. And I guess that's a question for Brian Gutekunst. Does he want to bring in a veteran type player there in the receiver room, or does he want to continue this strategy of going with a lot of young players, which the Packers have drafted the past few seasons: Watson, Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks? Does he want to bring a veteran to this room? And I think T. Higgins does make more sense than someone like Devontae Adams, just because Devontae Adams is a little bit older. I think that, T. Higgins, while he could get a lot of the targets, wouldn't necessarily be a target hog and become a guy that the Packers needed to feed constantly. I think he could come in and be one of the most productive Packers receivers, but also I think Jordan Love could still spread it around to Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft, all these different guys. And so at the end of the day, I really think it comes down to, what does Brian Gutekunst think is the most pressing need on this Packers team, and where does he want to utilize the money? And the Packers, I think, have the cap space to do a lot of different things. They have currently, according to Over the Cap, about $40 million in cap space available. And so it's not like if they signed T. Higgins that they couldn't make moves elsewhere. I think they have enough money to do that. But it would be very expensive to bring in T. Higgins. As I said, Over the Cap predicts him at $28 million per year. If Christian Watson had not suffered the ACL tear, I would say the Packers should not pursue T. Higgins just because of the cost. I would rather see that used in the edge rusher room, potentially at cornerback as well. There are a few other options there in free agency. But with the Christian Watson injury, I do think this is more interesting to me. And, the more you watch T. Higgins, it would be exciting to see him in this Packers offense. And no doubt the Packers offense would be better with T. Higgins on the field. I think he's a top 10, top 15 type receiver. And I think that he's someone that Jordan Love could really rely on. I think that Doubs is a guy Love can really rely on. He was very consistent at, getting those first downs, making contested catches. And I think that T. Higgins would be a similar guy. And that's where I wonder, the Packers wouldn't have that same type of deep threat that Christian Watson was. But as I said, I still think T. Higgins can win down the field and open things up for you vertically at times, even though he doesn't quite have the speed of Christian Watson. So at the end of the day, for me, I think that bringing in T. Higgins would be a smart move. The question for me, once again, is I don't really think he's going to leave the Bengals. It just seems like, if you're the Bengals, that having Higgins and Jamar Chase works very well. And if you move on from T. Higgins, there are some questions there. I know it's very expensive for the Bengals to keep all of them, to pay Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins close to the top of the market at all those positions, but it works really well. So if he doesn't stay in Cincinnati, everyone is going to be trying to pursue him, because when you look at the receiver market, he is the most valuable receiver out there. And so teams are going to be willing to pay him a lot of money. And will the Packers be willing to give him the most amount of money? Is he looking, what's his preference? Does he want to go to a place where he's clearly the number one guy? Does he want to make the most money possible because it is his first, large contract? Or does he want to, is his main goal, winning a championship? I would assume, if you're in his position, you're trying to look for a place where you can make the most money and be on a competitive roster. And I think there is going to be a lot of different teams that will fit that mold. And I think the Packers are one of them. I think the Packers are an attractive place for free agents because of what they showed this year. We saw Josh Jacobs say that he'll try to do some recruiting, and I think that T. Higgins, I think in his mind, if the Packers would be willing to pay him, I feel like he would be willing to come to Green Bay, because I think that looking at Jordan Love, I think there's no doubt that other quarterbacks or other receivers would like to come and play for him. So those are my thoughts. I think it could be a wise move. Not sure Gutekunst will do it. If I had to guess, I'd say he won't pay T. Higgins this kind of money. I think he'll use it elsewhere, but we shall see. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.